The subway doors closed right in front of his face. David stood there on the platform watching the train pull away and felt his stomach drop. He checked his phone. The interview was in 20 minutes and he was still 3 stops away. Perfect, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. Just perfect. He'd left his apartment with plenty of time to spare. The morning had started well. He'd even grabbed coffee and reviewed his notes one last time at the corner cafe. But then the trains decided to have other plans. First, there was an announcement about delays. Then his train sat in the tunnel for 10 minutes without moving. And now this. The next train arrived 5 minutes later, but those 5 minutes felt like forever. David tapped his foot, checked his phone 3 more times, and tried to calm the nervous energy building in his chest. When the train finally came, he squeezed in among the other passengers and watched the stops crawl by. By the time he reached his destination and climbed the stairs to street level, he was already 12 minutes late. The building was still 2 blocks away. He started walking fast, weaving between slower pedestrians, his leather portfolio tucked under his arm. The sun was bright and he could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead. The office building was one of those modern glass towers that reflected the sky. Very impressive, very intimidating. David pushed through the revolving door and found himself in a massive lobby with marble floors and contemporary art on the walls. The reception desk sat in the center like a throne, and behind it sat a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She was probably in her late 20s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked professionally done. Her nameplate read Rachel. She was typing something on her computer and didn't look up when he approached. "Hi, I'm here for an interview," David said, slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry, I'm running a bit late." The subway had delays and name? Rachel cut him off without looking up from her screen. "David Chen. I have an appointment at 9:30 with—" "You're late." Now she looked up, and her expression made it clear what she thought about that. Her eyes traveled from his face down to his slightly wrinkled shirt, then back up again. 15 minutes late, actually. "I know, I'm really sorry. Like I said, there were subway delays this morning and—" "Everyone takes the subway," Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. "Somehow other people managed to show up on time." Her voice carried across the lobby. A few other people waiting in the sitting area looked over. "Maybe you should have left earlier." "Ever think of that?" David felt his face getting hot. "I did leave early. There was an unexpected delay in the tunnel. These things happen sometimes." Rachel let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "These things happen to people who don't plan properly." She looked past him at the others waiting. "We have 3 other candidates here who all managed to arrive on time. They left their homes early enough to account for problems." One of the other candidates, a young woman in a navy suit, looked down at her phone, clearly uncomfortable. Another guy pretended to be very interested in a magazine, but David could feel their attention on him. "I understand," David said quietly, trying to keep his composure. "Is there any way I could still do the interview? I'm here now and I'm really interested in—" "Interested?" Rachel interrupted again. "If you were really interested, you would have made sure to be on time. First impressions matter in business. Did you know that? This is a professional firm, not some casual startup where people wander in whenever they feel like it." David took a deep breath. He'd dealt with difficult people before, but something about being publicly called out like this, in front of strangers, made it worse. "I completely agree that punctuality is important. I take my professional commitments seriously, which is why I left home with plenty of time. Sometimes circumstances beyond our control happen. I'm hoping doesn't cut it in the real world," Rachel said. She picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Hi, this is the front desk. Yes, your 9:30 is here. 15 minutes late." She paused, listening. "Uh-huh. Okay, I'll tell him." She hung up and looked at David with something close to satisfaction. "You'll have to wait. They're running on schedule with the other candidates. He'll go last after everyone else who bothered to show up on time. Have a seat over there." David nodded and walked to the waiting area, choosing a seat away from the other candidates. He could feel Rachel's eyes on him as he sat down. The leather chair was comfortable, but he couldn't relax. His portfolio sat on his lap, full of work he was proud of, ideas he'd developed, strategies he'd implemented successfully. But right now, none of that seemed to matter. The minutes crawled by. He watched the other candidates get called in one by one. Each interview seemed to last about 30 minutes. Rachel typed away at her computer, occasionally answering phone calls in a voice that was completely different from the one she'd used with him. Sweet, professional, helpful. At one point, a delivery person came in with a package. Rachel signed for it with a smile. "Thank you so much. You have a great day." Then she glanced at David and the smile disappeared. After about 45 minutes, one of the other candidates came back from his interview, looking pleased with himself. Rachel called him over and chatted with him like they were old friends, laughing at something he said. The guy looked at David on his way out, and David could see the pity in his eyes. Another 30 minutes passed. David checked his phone. He'd been waiting for over an hour now. The interview was supposed to be at 9:30. It was now 11:15. Finally, Rachel's phone buzzed. She picked it up, listened, then looked at David. "They're ready for you now." She didn't smile. "Try not to waste their time. They've been very patient already." David stood up, straightened his jacket, and picked up his portfolio. As he walked past the reception desk, Rachel spoke again, loud enough for the few people in the lobby to hear. "Hope you learned your lesson about showing up on time. This is a business, not a charity." David stopped and turned to look at her. For a moment, he considered responding, considered defending himself one more time. But instead, he just nodded slowly and continued walking toward the interview rooms. What Rachel didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that David wasn't exactly what he seemed. But that truth would have to wait for another day. The interview room was nothing like David expected. After the cold reception downstairs, he'd prepared himself for more of the same. But the woman who greeted him at the door had a warm smile and actually apologized for the wait. "David, hi. I'm Linda, the marketing director. Please come in and have a seat." She gestured to a comfortable chair across from a small conference table. "I heard there were some subway issues this morning." "Don't worry about it at all. These things happen in the city." David felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you. I really appreciate your understanding." Two other people sat at the table. A middle-aged man introduced himself as Tom, the creative director. The younger guy was Kevin, a senior strategist. They all seemed genuinely friendly, which was such a contrast to what had just happened downstairs that David almost couldn't believe it. "So," Linda began, opening a folder with his resume inside, "we've been really impressed with your background. Your portfolio is quite remarkable for someone your age. Tell us about the campaign you ran for that tech company last year." And just like that, David was in his element. He started explaining the strategy behind the campaign, how he'd identified the target audience, the channels they'd used, the creative approach they'd taken. As he talked, he pulled out examples from his portfolio, showing them the actual materials they'd created. Tom leaned forward, studying the designs. "This is really clean work. The messaging is clear without being boring. That's hard to do, especially in tech." "Thank you," David said. The challenge with that client was taking something very technical and making it feel accessible. We didn't want to dumb it down, but we also didn't want to alienate regular business owners who might need the service. Kevin jumped in with a question about the metrics. "What kind of results did you see?" David smiled. This was the best part. They saw a 47% increase in qualified leads in the first 3 months. Their conversion rate went up by 32%. And the best part was that their customer acquisition cost actually went down because we were targeting so precisely. "Wow," Linda said, making notes. "Those are impressive numbers. How did you approach the audience research?" For the next 40 minutes, they went deep into marketing strategy. David found himself relaxing completely. These people knew what they were talking about, and more importantly, they seemed to genuinely value his input. They asked smart questions. They challenged some of his ideas in a productive way. They shared their own experiences and failures. "One thing I'm curious about," Tom said, leaning back in his chair, "is how you handle feedback from clients who think they know better than you." "We deal with that a lot here," David laughed. "Oh man, that's always interesting. I had this one client who wanted to use Comic Sans in a campaign for a law firm." "A law firm?" Everyone at the table groaned and laughed. "What did you do?" Kevin asked. I showed them examples of how their competitors were branding themselves. I put together a mock-up their way and then UE. Side by side. Let the visuals do the talking. They ended up trusting our expertise, and the campaign did really well. Linda nodded approvingly. "That's a great approach, showing instead of just telling." The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. They talked about industry trends, about the challenges of digital marketing in an age when everyone claimed to be an expert, about the importance of storytelling in advertising. David shared insights that made them nod and take notes. He could tell they were genuinely impressed. But here's what they didn't know. What nobody in this building knew. David wasn't just another job candidate hoping for a position. 6 months ago, he'd sold his own digital marketing startup for more money than most people see in a lifetime. He'd built that company from nothing, starting in his tiny apartment with just a laptop and an idea. For 5 years, he'd worked 18-hour days, learned everything about the industry, made mistakes, recovered from those mistakes, and eventually built something valuable enough that a major corporation wanted to buy it. The sale had gone through quietly. No big press releases, no media attention. That's how David wanted it. He'd signed a non-compete agreement that prevented him from starting another marketing agency for 2 years. But sitting still wasn't in his nature. So he'd started exploring, trying to understand the industry from different angles. He'd been consulting with a few businesses, but mostly he'd been looking for his next opportunity. He had the capital now to do something bigger. Maybe acquire a company that had potential but needed better management. Maybe invest in a few promising startups. Maybe both. When he saw this job posting, something about it caught his attention. The company had a solid reputation, but seemed to be struggling with innovation. Their recent campaigns had been safe and boring. He'd done some research and discovered they were having financial problems, though they were keeping it quiet. So he'd applied for the job, partly out of curiosity. He wanted to see how they operated from the inside, what their culture was really like, whether they valued talent or just looked good on paper. This interview was really him interviewing them, though they didn't know it. And what he'd learned so far was interesting. The people in this room were talented and thoughtful. They knew their stuff. But downstairs, at the very first point of contact with the outside world, they had someone who treated people with contempt. Someone who judged and humiliated. That said something about the company's leadership and culture. David? Linda's voice brought him back to the present. I asked if you had any questions for us. Oh, sorry, he said with a slight smile. Actually, yes. Can you tell me about the company culture here? How would you describe it? The 3 interviewers exchanged glances. Tom spoke first. It's in transition, honestly. There have been some changes in leadership over the past year. Some growing pains. We have some amazing people here, Kevin added quickly. Really talented team. But there are definitely areas where we could improve. Linda nodded. We're being honest with you because we think you'd be a great fit, and we want you to have realistic expectations. The work is good, the clients are interesting, but like any company, we're not perfect. David appreciated their honesty. I respect that. Every organization has room for growth. They talked for another 15 minutes discussing the specifics of the role, the salary range, the benefits package. David asked thoughtful questions and gave thoughtful answers. But in the back of his mind, he was calculating, observing, planning. As the interview wrapped up, Linda stood and shook his hand. We'll be in touch within a few days, but between you and me, I think you'd be an excellent addition to the team. Thank you, David said. I really enjoyed our conversation. Tom and Kevin shook his hand as well, both echoing Linda's sentiment. As David gathered his portfolio and headed for the door, he felt good about how it went. These were good people doing their best in a flawed system. He took the elevator down to the lobby, his mind already working through possibilities he hadn't fully considered before. When the doors opened, he saw Rachel at her desk talking to another visitor with that same fake sweet voice she'd used with everyone except him. She glanced up as he walked past, and he caught the smirk on her face, like she was proud of how she'd treated him. Like putting him in his place had been the highlight of her day. David walked through the revolving door and out into the afternoon sun. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Hey, it's me, he said when his business manager picked up. Remember that marketing firm we were looking at last month? The one that might be up for sale? Yeah, that one. I want you to dig deeper into their financials. I think I might be interested after all. 3 months passed and David had almost forgotten about the interview. Almost, but not quite. Some experiences stick with you, especially the humiliating ones. He'd received a job offer from them 2 days after the interview. It was a good offer, actually. Competitive salary, solid benefits, room for growth. He'd politely declined, citing other opportunities. Linda had sounded disappointed on the phone, but she'd understood. What happened next, though, surprised even David. His business manager, Robert, called him on a Tuesday morning. "You're going to want to hear this," Robert said, and David could hear the excitement in his voice. "Remember that marketing firm? The one you interviewed at? Yeah, what about it?" "They're looking for a buyer, quietly, very quietly. They're in more trouble than we thought." David sat up straighter in his home office chair. "How much trouble?" "They've lost 3 major clients in the past 2 months. Their biggest account just announced they're going with a different agency. The company's burning through cash and the current owner wants out before things get worse." "Who's the current owner?" David asked, opening his laptop. "Guy named Richard Patterson. He inherited the business from his brother 5 years ago. From what I'm hearing, he's not really a marketing guy. He's been letting the company coast on its old reputation, but that only works for so long." David pulled up the company's website and started clicking through their recent work. Robert was right. The campaigns looked dated, uninspired. Nothing like the innovative work the company had been known for a decade ago. "What are the numbers looking like?" David asked. Robert went through the financials. The company was profitable, but barely. Revenue had been declining steadily for 3 years. They had good people on staff, but morale was apparently low. The leadership was disconnected. Classic case of a business with great bones but poor management. "Here's the interesting part," Robert continued. "If someone came in with fresh ideas, updated their approach, and actually invested in the talent they already have, this company could turn around pretty quickly. The brand name still means something in the industry." David leaned back in his chair, thinking. What are they asking? They haven't named a price yet. They're just feeling out if there's any interest. But based on their current situation, I think we could get it for a very reasonable amount. Probably 30 to 40% below what it would be worth if it was healthy. "Set up a meeting," David said. "But keep my name out of it for now. I want this handled through the lawyers and business managers. Complete confidentiality. You don't want them to know it's you?" David thought about Rachel's face. That smirk, the way she'd made him feel small in front of strangers. "Not yet. Let's just say I'm curious to see how this plays out." Over the next 6 weeks, David's team conducted their due diligence. They reviewed every document, every contract, every financial statement. They interviewed former employees who'd left the company. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and troubling. The core team was talented. People like Linda, Tom, and Kevin were the real deal. They cared about their work and wanted to do great things. But they were being held back by outdated systems, poor leadership decisions, and a toxic culture that started at the top and trickled down. One former employee, a junior designer who'd quit 3 months earlier, had particularly interesting things to say during her exit interview that David's team obtained. "The work was fine," she'd said. "My direct managers were great, but the overall environment was just exhausting. There was this attitude of superiority mixed with insecurity, like we'd treat potential clients and visitors terribly, but then wonder why we weren't getting new business. The front desk situation alone probably cost us contracts." "What do you mean by front desk situation?" the interviewer had asked. "The receptionist. Rachel. She's the owner's niece, so nobody could say anything to her. But she was just mean to people. Rude to delivery drivers, dismissive to vendors, condescending to job candidates. I watched her turn away a potential client once because she didn't think they looked important enough. Turned out they were a CEO doing research in casual clothes. When Mr. Patterson found out, he was furious, but he still didn't do anything about it because she's family." David had listened to that interview recording twice. It confirmed what he'd experienced firsthand. The negotiations moved forward. Richard Patterson was eager to sell. He'd never wanted to run a marketing agency in the first place. He'd tried his best, but his heart wasn't in it, and it showed. David's lawyers negotiated a fair price, one that gave Richard a dignified exit and gave David a solid foundation to build on. The deal was structured to close quickly. All parties signed non-disclosure agreements. The employees would be informed only after everything was finalized. Richard would make the announcement, introduce the new owner, and then step away. On the Friday before the closing, David walked through the city. Past the glass tower where he'd been humiliated months earlier, he stood across the street watching people come and go through the revolving doors. In 3 days, that would be his building, his company, his responsibility. He thought about what he wanted to do with it. The vision was already forming in his mind. Update the technology. Invest in training. Give the talented people room to do their best work. Build a culture based on respect and excellence, not on who you knew or how good you were at playing politics. And yes, there would need to be changes in personnel. Some people were assets. Others were liabilities. He'd learned in his own business that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was help someone find a better fit elsewhere. His phone buzzed. A text from Robert. Deal closes Monday morning. Papers are signed. Congratulations, boss. David smiled and put his phone away. Monday morning. That was 3 days away. Inside the building, life went on as usual. Rachel sat at her desk, scrolling through social media between tasks. She had no idea that the company was about to change hands. She had no idea that her uncle had made a deal with investors she'd never heard of. She had no idea that come Monday, everything would be different. The employees knew something was happening. Rumors had been flying for weeks. Some people were worried about layoffs. Others were hopeful that new ownership might bring positive changes. Nobody knew who the buyer was. Richard had kept that information locked down tight, even from his senior staff. Linda had her suspicions that something big was coming. She'd been with the company for 8 years and had seen it slowly decline under Richard's management. She'd stayed because she loved the work and believed in what the company could be, but she'd started updating her resume just in case. Tom and Kevin had been talking about maybe leaving together and starting their own small agency. They were tired of fighting against the current, tired of watching good ideas get shot down, tired of seeing talented young people quit because the culture was so discouraging. None of them could have guessed what was about to happen. David spent the weekend preparing. He reviewed his plans one more time, made notes about his priorities for the first week, thought about how he wanted to introduce himself to the team. He wanted to be fair but clear, compassionate but firm. He'd learned from his own mistakes as a young entrepreneur that good leadership meant making hard decisions and owning them. Sunday night, he barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Tomorrow morning, he'd walk back through those doors. But this time, everything would be different. This time, he'd be walking in as the owner. Monday morning came with clear skies and nervous energy inside the glass tower. The email had gone out late Friday afternoon. Mandatory all-staff meeting at 9 o'clock sharp. No exceptions. New ownership would be introducing themselves. Rachel arrived at 8:30 earlier than usual. She'd spent extra time on her makeup and chosen her most expensive outfit. Whatever changes were coming, she felt secure. Her uncle had assured her before he left on Friday that she'd be fine. Family took care of family. Besides, she'd been there for 3 years. She knew how everything worked at the front desk. She settled into her chair and started scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing at employees as they filtered in. Everyone looked tense. Good, she thought. Let them worry. She had nothing to be concerned about. Linda arrived at 8:45 carrying a coffee and looking like she hadn't slept much. She nodded at Rachel but didn't stop to chat. She never did. Rachel had always thought Linda was stuck up anyway, too serious about everything. By 8:55, the main conference room was packed. The space could hold about 60 people and every seat was filled. People lined the walls. The entire company was there, from senior directors to junior assistants. The energy in the room was a mixture of curiosity and dread. Rachel found a seat near the front. She wanted the new owner to see her, to know she was important. She crossed her legs and waited confident. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened. David walked in wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. The same portfolio he'd had 3 months ago. Rachel's face went blank. Then pale, then red, she recognized him immediately. The late guy. The one she'd lectured about punctuality and professionalism. The one she'd made wait for over an hour as punishment. The one she'd mocked on his way out. That guy was walking to the front of the room like he owned the place because he did. The room went completely silent. Several people who'd been in the lobby that day recognized him too. They looked at each other with wide eyes. One woman actually put her hand over her mouth. David stood at the front of the room and smiled. Not a smug smile, just calm and professional. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Chen, and as of today, I'm the new owner of this company. His voice was clear and steady. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty over the past few weeks, and I want to address that head on. First, let me say that I'm not here to destroy what you've built. I'm here because I see incredible potential in this team and this brand." He clicked a button, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. "I spent 5 years building my own marketing startup from nothing. We grew it, made mistakes, learned from those mistakes, and eventually sold it to a larger company. I learned a lot during that journey about what makes a company successful and what holds it back." People were starting to relax slightly. His tone was reassuring, not threatening. "I've spent the last several weeks reviewing everything about this company. The work you do, the clients you serve, the culture you've created. And here's what I found. You have some of the most talented people in the industry working here. Your creative work, when you're allowed to do your best, is excellent. But you've been held back by outdated systems, limited resources, and leadership that didn't fully understand this business." Linda found herself nodding. This was the most honest assessment she'd heard in years. "So here's what's going to change," David continued. "We're investing in new technology. We're updating our processes. We're going to give you the tools and freedom to do the innovative work I know you're capable of. We're going to rebuild relationships with clients and pursue new opportunities." He paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with different people. "But I also need to be clear about something else. We're going to build a culture based on respect, professionalism, and merit. Not on politics, not on who you're related to, not on how long you've been here. Everyone will be evaluated on their performance and their contribution to the team. That's it." Rachel felt like the walls were closing in. She tried to make herself smaller in her chair, hoping somehow he wouldn't notice her. "I'll be scheduling one-on-one meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks," David said. "I want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, your ideas. I want to understand what's working and what needs to change. Your input matters, and I'm genuinely interested in hearing it." He talked for another 20 minutes about his vision for the company, about the investments he planned to make, about the opportunities he saw. People started asking questions. Good questions. The mood in the room shifted from anxious to cautiously optimistic. When the meeting ended, David stayed at the front of the room, talking to employees who came up to introduce themselves or ask follow-up questions. Linda was one of the first. "That was an impressive presentation," she said, shaking his hand. "I have to ask, though. You interviewed here a few months ago, didn't you?" David smiled. "I did. That was actually a fact-finding mission, though I was genuinely interested in the position at the time. And now you own the place. That's quite a turn of events." "Life's funny that way," David said. "I was impressed by you and your team during that interview. That's part of why I moved forward with the acquisition. Good people are hard to find." Linda felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "Well, I'm glad you did. This place has so much potential. We've just needed someone who understood that." Throughout the morning, David talked to dozens of employees. He listened more than he spoke, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. He was building relationships and gathering information, but he was also watching Rachel. She'd stayed in her seat long after the meeting ended, and then she'd slipped out quietly, going back to her desk. He could see her through the glass wall, sitting there, staring at her computer screen without actually doing anything. Around 2 o'clock, David's assistant, who he'd brought with him from his previous company, started scheduling the one-on-one meetings. Rachel was scheduled for later that afternoon. The word had spread through the office by then. Everyone knew what had happened. The story of how Rachel had treated the new owner during his interview had traveled from person to person, getting slightly exaggerated with each telling. People who'd had their own negative experiences with her were watching to see what would happen. At 3 o'clock, David returned from lunch with his management team. He'd brought in a few key people from his previous ventures. To help with the transition, they'd spent lunch discussing priorities and reviewing the staff evaluations from the previous year. One document stood out. Rachel's file was thin. No performance reviews for the past 2 years. No documentation of goals or achievements. Just a hire date and a note that she was related to the previous owner. That was it, but there were other documents. Emails from vendors complaining about her behavior. A note from a potential client who decided to go elsewhere after a negative interaction at the front desk. Comments from exit interviews with former employees who mentioned the hostile reception area. David read through everything carefully. He believed in being thorough and fair, even when dealing with someone who hadn't shown him the same courtesy. At 4 o'clock, his assistant knocked on his office door. "Rachel is here for her meeting." David looked up from the documents spread across his desk. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." He gathered the papers, organized his thoughts, and prepared for a conversation that was 3 months in the making. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. But it was about accountability and about building the kind of company he wanted to lead. When Rachel walked through the door, her confidence from that morning was completely gone. She looked like she wanted to disappear. "Please have a seat," David said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat down without saying a word, her hands folded tightly in her lap. David closed the door and returned to his desk. For a moment he just looked at her, remembering how small she'd made him feel in that lobby. Then he opened her file and began to speak. David let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. Rachel looked like she might cry, but she was holding it together. Barely. "I want to start," David said calmly, "by asking you a question. Do you remember me?" Rachel's voice came out small. "Yes. Tell me what you remember." She swallowed hard. "You came in for an interview. You were late. I wasn't very professional about it." David nodded slowly. "You weren't just unprofessional, Rachel. You publicly humiliated me, in front of other candidates, in front of visitors. You made assumptions about who I was and what I deserved, and you treated me with contempt." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I appreciate that," David said. "But here's what concerns me. That wasn't an isolated incident, was it?" He opened the file and pulled out several printed emails. "I've been reviewing documentation from the past 3 years. There are multiple complaints here. A vendor who stopped doing business with us because of how you treated their delivery driver. A potential client who walked out and never came back. Former employees who mentioned the front desk. Environment in their exit interviews." Rachel stared at the papers like they might bite her. "The front desk is the first impression people get of this company," David continued. "It's the first voice they hear on the phone, the first face they see when they walk in. That position requires someone who understands that every single person who comes through that door deserves respect, not just the ones who look important or show up exactly on time." "I know," Rachel said quietly. I thought I was helping, maintaining standards, by making people feel small," David asked. "By judging them before you knew anything about them? That's not maintaining standards, Rachel. That's just being cruel." A tear rolled down her cheek and she quickly wiped it away. David leaned back in his chair. This was the hard part. The part where he had to decide what kind of leader he wanted to be. He'd been thinking about this moment for months. Part of him had imagined this as some kind of victory, a chance to give her a taste of her own medicine. But sitting here now, looking at someone who clearly understood the weight of what she'd done, he realized that revenge would feel empty. "I'm not going to fire you," he said. Rachel's head snapped up, surprise and relief flooding her face, but David continued, holding up his hand. "Things are going to change significantly." He pulled out another document. "This is your employment file. It's basically empty. No performance reviews, no documented goals, no record of professional development. The only reason you've kept this position is because you were related to the previous owner. That ends today." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. "Here's what I'm offering you," David said. "You can stay with the company, but not at the front desk. That position requires someone with customer service experience and a proven track record of treating people with respect. I'll be hiring someone new for that role." He slid a paper across the desk. "I'm offering you a position as an administrative assistant in our operations department.
Entry level.
You'll be supporting the team with basic tasks like filing, data entry, scheduling. The pay is lower than what you're making now, about 25% less." Rachel looked at the paper, processing what this meant. "You'll also be required to complete a professional development program," David continued. "Communication skills, workplace professionalism, customer service basics. The company will pay for it, but attendance is mandatory. You'll meet with a supervisor weekly to discuss your progress. After 6 months, we'll evaluate whether this is the right fit for both of us." He paused, making sure she understood. "This is a genuine second chance, Rachel, but it's also the only one you're going to get. If there are any more complaints about how you treat people, any more incidents of unprofessional behavior, we'll part ways. No warnings, no discussions. Are we clear?" "Yes," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve this." "You're right," David said, not unkindly. "You don't. But I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. The question is, are you willing? Rachel nodded emphatically. Yes, absolutely, I'll do whatever it takes. Good. David stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You'll start in your new position next Monday. Take the rest of this week to transition your current responsibilities. HR will have all the details for you by end of day. Rachel stood up, clutching the paper. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why are you giving me another chance? After what I did? David thought about that for a moment. Because someone gave me a chance once when I didn't deserve it. I made a huge mistake early in my career that could have ended everything. But my mentor saw potential in me and helped me learn from it. That changed my life. I'm not saying what you did is okay. It's not. But I am saying that one bad pattern doesn't have to define your entire future. Rachel's eyes filled with tears again. I won't let you down. Don't let yourself down, David said. That's what matters. After Rachel left, David sat in his office for a few minutes processing the conversation. It had gone differently than he'd imagined. Less satisfying in some ways, but more meaningful in others. There was a knock on his door. Linda poked her head in. How'd it go? Fair, David said. I think it was fair. The whole office is buzzing. Everyone knows what happened 3 months ago. Some people thought you'd fire her on the spot. I thought about it, David admitted. But that's not who I want to be as a leader. Besides, firing her would have been easy. Helping her become better is harder. But it's the right thing to do. Linda smiled. You know, when you interviewed here, I told Tom that we needed to hire you. He said you seemed too good to be true. Turns out we were both right. Over the next few months, the company transformed. David kept his promises. He invested in new technology. He gave the creative team freedom to take risks. He hired a new receptionist, a woman named Patricia who'd worked in hospitality for 15 years and treated every visitor like they were the most important person in the building. Revenue started climbing. They won back 2 of the clients they'd lost and landed 3 new major accounts. The creative work improved dramatically. People who'd been thinking about leaving decided to stay. The office energy shifted from defensive to optimistic. Rachel showed up every Monday for her professional development classes. She worked quietly in the operations department, doing basic tasks without complaint. Slowly, people noticed changes in how she interacted with others. She was quieter now, more thoughtful. She listened more than she spoke. 6 months later, David called her in for her evaluation. Her supervisor had given her solid marks. No complaints, steady improvement, good attitude. You've done well, David told her. Your supervisor says you're reliable and professional. That's exactly what we needed to see. Thank you, Rachel said. She looked different now. Less makeup, simpler clothes, but something else too. She seemed more genuine, less like she was playing a role. I'm extending your position permanently, David said. Same role, but we're taking you off probation. You've earned that. Rachel's face lit up with genuine relief and gratitude. I really appreciate this. I know I started off terribly, but this experience has taught me so much. About work, about people, about myself. Good, David said. That's what second chances are for. Learning. A year after David took over, the company was thriving. They doubled their client list, won industry awards, and been featured in marketing publications as a company to watch. The culture had completely changed. People felt valued, respected, empowered. David sometimes thought back to that morning when he'd stood in the lobby, being lectured by someone who'd made assumptions about who he was. He could have let that moment define him, could have let it make him bitter or vengeful. Instead, he'd used it as a lesson in what kind of leader he wanted to be. Not someone who humiliated people when they made mistakes. Not someone who judged based on first impressions, but someone who held people accountable while also believing in their ability to grow. And Rachel, in her quiet way, had proven that belief wasn't misplaced. She'd never be management material, probably, but she showed up every day, did her work well, and treated people with the respect she hadn't shown that morning in the lobby. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's building something better and bringing people along with you, even the ones who didn't think you deserved the chance.